Welcome to Pharmacy in Focus, where I will be having pocket-sized conversations on current topics and interests relating to pharmacy and the wider health sector. My name is Sharina Basan, bringing you Pharmacy in Focus on behalf of the Pharmaceutical Society of New Zealand. Welcome to this episode of Pharmacy in Focus. Today I am joined by Gary Chalmers. Gary has been a pharmacist for over 40 years. He has owned and in recent years sold Collingwood Pharmacy in Nelson. He is currently locuming and supporting pharmacies in Gisborne, and he is also a very strong advocate for the Community Pharmacy Anticoagulation Management Program. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you very much, Trina.
Now, to get started, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I was born in Gisborne. I'm 66. I did a bee farm in Otago, graduating at the end of 78. And I did an internship at Napier Hospital, as it was then, subsequently demolished. And I've worked in both hospital and community and travelled and worked. I've worked in Australia and Great Britain, and just a few years ago my wife and I went back to Ireland and worked for nearly a year there, just before I bought my pharmacy at the ripe old age of 49, and stayed in that until I sold 4 years ago.
Wow.
And as you say, I've carried on locuming, sometimes more intensely than other times, but I think in reality I could work 7 days a week if I really wanted to, but I don't.
And that's understandable. You need your break as well.
Yeah. I'm tired after.
So you said you did a bit of travelling, so I guess we've got some similarities there. I worked overseas for a while as well earlier in my career. Yeah. You registered as a pharmacist in the late 70s?
Yep. At the end of the 70s, yes. So
tell me, what was pharmacy like when you first started?
Yeah, basically the big change has been computerization. And in those days, we had prescription books and we wrote everything down, or we were photocopying the scripts on microfiche, the little roll-up things.
Yes.
And scripts it was all very much paper driven, sending off piles of paper scripts at the end of the day, end of the month, and generating labels with typewriters. We typed out the instructions, had little stickers on it that said 1 repeat or 2 repeats or no repeats, and quite laborious, obviously, and far less sophisticated than we do now. And also, aside from just the production of dispensing, things like the INR service, nitrofurantoin, sildenafil, never did that. Couldn't do it. Weren't allowed to, obviously. Couldn't sell anything, really.
So you mentioned some of the things that have come up in more recent years when it comes to the more recent services. Just going back a little bit, you talked about the typewriters and how things were a bit more laborious because it was more sort of handwritten and things as well in books.
Yeah. I used to actually have handwritten labels in the UK. They were even more Dickensian, really. They didn't have counting trays. I used to pour things into an egg cup and then...
Oh my gosh.
Amazing. Yeah. And it was like the old curiosity shop, my pharmacy I worked in. I remember one, it was probably 200 or 300 years old in Richmond.
Wow.
It was amazing. Yeah.
And in those days, did you have all the pre-packed medicine that we do now? What was the sort of
No, it was a
layout
lot of counting. There was nothing like a robot. There was nothing, even foil wrapped tablets were unusual. It was, I remember one of my very first jobs, we used to buy amphetamine, or dexamphetamine, wasn't it? Dex, it used to come in 1,000 bottle, but in fact, they sold it by weight. So we had to count out multiples of 100 to check it, and we always had a few left over. Just, and yeah, it was made by KPs in Kaikoura Valley Road. Yeah. So yeah, very laborious, making things, making creams and lotions and all that stuff that really we probably don't do now. Yeah, it was interesting, but different, very different. In fact, as I've been reminiscing about this conversation, I was going to say I remember the very first part charge on a medicine, and that was on tryptanol tablets, and they were something like 30 cents for a month. It was very strange,
And
because we never
when
used
was
1979, my intern.
so prior to that were prescriptions free? Is that
absolutely free? Not a penny was spent. Yeah, absolutely. And now we're going back to it. No, it was quite weird. Yeah.
So, I mean, I want to come back to the compounding in a little bit, but let's just follow on from that conversation about the first part charge. So it was 30 cents at the time.
Oh, something like that. Yeah.
And how did customers and patients take that first part charge? What was their
reaction? Outrage. Just and with a certain justification, because it was the thin end of the wedge. Yeah, I mean, obviously, once they started that, they could just carry on because the precedent had started. But no, it was not received happily.
And how long did it take for more and more part charges to be added on to the medicine?
Yeah, they started lots of. I mean, if you follow the timeline, there was all sorts of efforts to try and work out what was fair and equitable. A3s and A1s, and for a short while there was A2s, P1s and 2s and 3s, and they're all different dollar values, really trying to target, as they talk about now, people with community services cards, but of course there's people who have quite big asset bases and still qualify for a community services card. So it wasn't as fair and equitable as it could be. I mean, I think just a blanket approach is much easier for a pharmacist because we're not having to work out where they are. It was just inefficient, and we were basically tax collectors, as we are now, really. I mean, it's not a clinical role.
So a lot of people certainly agreed with you there. Let's now move back to compounding and making lotions and various other things. Right. So what I guess percentage of your day in the late 70s, early 80s would have been spent making and compounding medicine?
Yeah, so I was working at a Napier hospital, and we had quite an emphasis on manufacturing. In fact, they had a sterile unit which had been set up in the 60s or 70s and made all their ampules and things like that. But that wasn't my department. We had this giant stainless steel bowl that had a supply of steam from the hospital system, and we used to melt the emulsifying wax and stuff in, and it was very much a witch's cauldron. It was quite incredible. And then every day we'd collect they had Savlon bottles, big ones, big sort of 5-litre bottles, bring them back to the pharmacy, and we'd put concentrate in and then top them up with one of those, you probably wouldn't remember this either, but beer taps used to come on a hose, and they used to fill all the beers. Well,
no, I don't remember.
We weren't filling it with beer, but we were putting water into it, and we'd send out, I don't know, 30 of these containers to the hospital wards. I don't know what they did with it. They probably just washed every surface with it. But it was quite a there was a touch of mad professorship about it. That's for sure.
And was there anything else that you recall used to manufacture yourselves more regularly?
Yeah, I remember that we had a formula for making silver sulfadiazine cream with from scratch with sulfadiazine and silver nitrate, and if you got it wrong, it went dark black. It went black because it was silver nitrate's the stuff used in negatives. But yeah, that was quite interesting. But it was okay. how sterile is this? I don't think it is, but yeah.
And what would be the most interesting or odd thing that you recall making?
Yeah, silver sulfadiazine was right up there. Yeah, there wasn't anyone really producing much in the way of even things like aqueous cream and things. You didn't have to make it, but there wasn't like a huge, nothing like Pharmac doing contract, doing tenders, bringing in stuff and keeping prices down. So hospitals, I suppose, and pharmacies would try and keep the price down by making their own. But yeah, it was as I say, quite sort of the mad guy in the lab making this stuff and tucked away out the back with Bunsen burners and.
Indeed. I think when we had a previous conversation, I mentioned some of the interesting things that I had made when I worked with an older pharmacist as well.
Hugh,
I learned a lot from him. Whether I could remember how to make half of those things now, probably not without the formulas.
I know. Well, they all had a little book.
That's right. Did indeed.
It was like.
That's right. Now, just before we pressed record, you were telling me about when you went through Otago to gain your qualification, and you had, was it 19?
19 graduated. The class was 25, and some dropped out. Just went along to something else. So 19 colleagues came out. It was just how it was, but it I think it sort of started doubling numbers after that quite rapidly. I'm not sure how many go in now, but that was and of course there was another pharmacy school at Hiratonga, in Wellington.
That's right. Let's now move on a little bit to your when you bought Collingwood Pharmacy.
Yep.
What changes? Also, in what year did you buy Collingwood Pharmacy?
2006, at the start of 2006. Yeah.
And what changes have you noticed as a business owner over those years?
Well, I think the big change has been these big barn type places coming on board, scaring, I think, young pharmacists off perhaps the commitment or the ambition to own. And I think that's just unfortunate, because when I was first registered, it actually was one man or one woman, one pharmacy, and then they extended that so you could buy 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 something. I never had any ambition to do that, and now it seems they've got a loophole to allow numerous outlets, and I think if you had one open up down the road from you, you'd be worried. But my model was in a medical centre surrounded by pharmacies, and I did have a big pharmacy across the road, but there was room for more than one, and we basically tried to emphasise our involvement with dispensing and didn't really pursue the retail side, and that was my preference. But I guess when I had talked to my colleagues, even in Gisborne, they're finding it difficult to attract the next generation to show interest, which is I think a bit of a shame, really. I just wonder if they have been frightened off something that isn't frightening. It's amazing. It was fantastic for me, professionally and financially, and satisfaction in what I was doing. Yeah, maybe we were just like a lucky generation, but I do think it could come again if someone was prepared to have a go and not be frightened by it.
And when you say, when you've been talking to your colleagues, do you think this is more of an issue around retaining or attracting pharmacists and staff to more regional areas, or is this across the board?
Well, I'm certainly not the expert on other centres, the bigger centres. As you know, I locum here for my friends in Gisborne because I enjoy it, and I've got family here, and I know like every day in this pharmacy anyway is like a school reunion for me. I see all my old schoolmates, a little bit older, working in Nelson, same. It's a slightly bigger version of Gisborne, but there's lots of similarities. Maybe it's a city or a region that isn't that attractive to 20-year-olds, but it's you would think be quite attractive to 30, 40-year-olds who've got families and want to settle down in because I mean, if you buy a pharmacy or come to a region, you probably are going to stay here. It's it gets its hooks in, and you build up a community, and it's perhaps just getting away from the big city, having a go.
And you mentioned you're locuming, and you're able to catch up with your friends in Gisborne nowadays, which is great. You mentioned in a previous conversation that we had that there are some services that have been funded in Nelson that aren't where you are currently. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so when I came to work here, just turned up to, I think the first Saturday morning I was working, and in came some young woman who wanted the ECP, and I'm happy to help her out. And I said, so do we, what's the charge? Do you bill this to the PHO, or, what do you guys do? And they don't have that arrangement. Well, we have that in Nelson, and not only young women who perhaps are, slightly at a higher risk, I suppose, or need. There's no question other than, are you a resident in Nelson? And we're not even, well, we're going to ask their age, but it's usually young women, but can be any age. There's no barrier. There's no charge at all. We bill the PHO, and I think it's been fairly clearly shown that our terminations have decreased. And let's have a guess at a cost of a termination of $1,000. It's probably woefully short. And the fact that they don't have that arrangement, financial arrangement in Gisborne, was a real surprise, because I would have thought there would be a little bit more of financial constraints here. There's it's area where there is lots of financial burdens and employment opportunities, the recent cyclones, all that stuff. It's definitely, you can have a feeling that some people are struggling here, but that was something that I would have thought they would have just looked around and made a very simple decision on. But I don't really know the history behind it. But as I say, I was first day, and you go, wow, you charge them. What do you charge them? And it can't be nothing. You can't give it away. You've got to get paid. So it's a barrier.
So it'd be an interesting experience for yourself and potentially other people that are locuming across the country as well, when they're going to various regions.
Absolutely.
And what were called the different DHBs around the country. And I guess moving forward, it was a bit more equitable than.
Sure. Yeah, Nelson's one of the things it does really well. It's got a the PHO have got a great portal. Basically, you just type in the NHI, pull up the menu and choose which service you're providing, and then basically bang, whoop, that's CCP, tick the box, put in the script number you've done, and it sends off the bill, and you get paid for it in the next payment day. COVID ditto, yeah, various services, and couldn't make it easier. And of course, because you're not really going to talk to the women about cost, you've got a little bit of time, a little bit more of an opportunity to just do the consult, and I think they benefit from that.
And talking a little bit about services, and in this regard it was ECP, but you also mentioned earlier a couple of other services as well, and I know you're a big advocate for CPAMS.
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit about your experience with CPAMS in Nelson?
Well, interestingly enough, since I sold my pharmacy 2019, I've continued to, because I was going to keep on working, doing work like this. It's very important that I've kept up to date, obviously, but also got a full quiver of arrows to take with me. So I did the CPAMS course. I worked in a pharmacy in Motueka, which did that. Quite a process, I must admit. It took me quite a while, but because I was only working part-time, I could study. I guess I'm in a very fortunate position where I'm not working 40 or 50 hours a week and then trying to keep up with my continuing education and do all this stuff that we are obliged to do, probably quite rightly, but difficult to find time for. I always found that a real struggle as an owner. Anyway, did INR, recently done nitrofurantoin, obviously sildenafil and so on. So I like to think I can more or less go to any pharmacy and do anything they want me to without, kind of like, oh, well, CPAM service is shut while Sean's away or whatever. I can just step right in there. But having said that, I mean, it's no real hardship because I really enjoy that work. And as you say, I am a strong advocate, and I applaud your efforts to make it more of a standard service that pharmacies provide. And while there's always going to be some, having to do the training, set up some equipment and stuff, it's a very enjoyable aspect of pharmacy. I know other people I've spoken to really enjoy it, really well supported by the patients. Not one of them that I can tell would go back to venipuncture and ringing their doctor at 5 o'clock to try and get a new dose and all that sort of stuff. We're very almost non-invasive. I mean, I make appointments because you want to know how many people are coming in a day, but I usually say, look, if you're flexible, I'm flexible. I can just sit down. I've got the vast majority of my regular customers on a very easy cycle. While I'm away in Gisborne, only a few of them will have to come in for a test, I hope, and I'll see them all next week or this week when I get back.
And you said that the CPAM service is well supported by patients, and you also mentioned that you and some of your colleagues you've talked to really enjoy providing it. What about the GPs?
Well, we're on really good terms with our GPs in the same building and known them all for many years. And I'd say that, except perhaps a little bit of another thing they've chipped away from us. When I say they, I mean the health system. The doctors don't really miss it. They realise that it's not a patient-centred service they're providing, and it's kind of difficult when they are seeing patients all day and then having to catch up with, for example, their notes, their referrals, their returning phone calls. The last thing they really need is to ring up a someone and say, oh, you better take 4 and 5 milligrams, whatever. Not only, as you well know, pharmacy's got a fantastic hit rate, keeping people in range, and a very big part of that is the software, which is incredibly intuitive, easy to use. Patients love their little charts and email appointments and reminders, and the system is as good as it could be for those people lucky enough to get onto it. And I've got, amongst my patient base, I've got a retired haematologist and one of the anaesthetists from the hospital. And, when I first met the haematologist and found out what he used to do, I did feel a certain amount of trepidation. But, he treats me like a colleague and in a real, he respects my direction. And I really try hard, of course.
Of course.
Really hard. But all the patients are so positive about it. There's not one of them would go back to going to the lab and making an appointment, having to wait and having a blood test. And it's an incredible system, actually. And it's a pleasure and very and satisfying to be part of. And actually you get a lot of, as I say, kind of respect out of it. They see you differently. You're the true, almost the pharmacy cliche, the medicine expert. And in this case, we really are.
Indeed. And you've mentioned a little bit there about the patients and also the GPs being on board and the satisfaction that you get from providing this. And you've also mentioned some of the other accreditation that you've done, which has helped you to provide other services and support to people as well. When you think about the future of pharmacy, what would you like to see in the next 5 years?
Yeah, that's interesting. As I said before, and I don't want to be kind of like a know-all, but it's a wonderful profession which has given me enormous personal and financial rewards, in the sense of being able to use my training, use my knowledge to interact with a large number of people, and I think still make a decent living. And I think that largely came about by being an owner, and I think anyone who is considering it in the least should explore it. There's a generation of which I'm part of, the grey tsunami, who are looking to pass it on, and they are generally going to be supportive of someone coming on board. The challenges of discounted script fees. Everybody thinks that they can do pharmacy better than pharmacists, and maybe retail-wise they can run rings around us. But I think what I'm seeing is an indication from certain political parties that they see pharmacy as a community asset. And we can always argue about what that's worth, but it is something that we should be strongly advocating for. There's no point trying to sell stuff cheaper than someone else. You'll never win that one. But you can know all your customers by name and have them respect you and basically want to come and see you because you give them something that they don't get anywhere else. And I see that in every pharmacy I go to. There's a lot of pressure on, just tuning out the scripts. But if we could, my vision would be getting rid of some of the petty rules and the bureaucracy that restricts us over, such piddling amounts of money. I mean, I had a guy who was on ezetimibe, and he'd been discharged from hospital after. He told me he had 5 heart attacks, but maybe that was a little bit too much. Anyway, he didn't have a special authority for ezetimibe. And I looked it up, and they're 95 cents a box. And I'm kind of thinking, really? This guy's just had, if he'd had 5 heart attacks, he's had at least 5 days in ICU and CCU and all the rest of it. And they won't give him a script for this, which maybe wasn't their intention, but, he was discharged on it, so you would have thought that's what the specialist wanted. Anyway, he was just cut adrift, and he was almost crying. He said, "I can't afford this. I can't pay for it." And I said, "Well, just take one, and we'll sort it." And it was just sad that we were having this big hoo-ha over something that wasn't really worth anything. I mean, we probably, I just think of all the, sort of people who can't tolerate Pradaxa or something, bringing it back, oh, there's $200 just chucking that out, and we've got 95 cent ezetimibes. You can't afford to supply it, or he can't afford to pay for it.
So you mentioned some of the changes you would like to see in the next few years, but you've also mentioned some of the struggles with staffing, and that obviously that is putting a pressure on all pharmacies and, well, really all industries really around the country. And I'm just wondering, as someone who has worked in pharmacy for 43 years, what would you like to say to the early or mid-career pharmacists and technicians who are listening today?
Yeah, I'd hope they'd stick it in there. As I said, it's been a fabulous career for me, and very much in the twilight of that. But I think pharmacy is not going to go away. We're not going to be taken over by robots or big brand places. They obviously have a place, and the pharmacy I'm working in here at the moment's got 2 robots. It's got a alpaca and a dispensing robot, and they're wonderful. And if I never counted another Zopiclone or bendrafluozide in my life, I wouldn't be upset. But really, they're tools to give us the opportunity to liaise and help our customers and get away from the drudgery of it, if you like. I mean, it's not that much of a drudgery, but I am very optimistic about the future, and I think people should be trying to find out what they like in pharmacy, and I liked talking to people and dealing with people. I'd like to think we're all, to a certain degree, dealing with little bits of people's lives and making, hopefully, some improvements, just little bits at a time. It doesn't have to be a massive intervention, but if we can just keep that respect, that reward you get through being, the expert, it's a wonderful feeling.
Right. Hey, thank you so much for your time today, Gary, for taking us through your journey over the last 40 years, what pharmacy was like then, some of the changes that you've seen over the years, some of the things that you really enjoy, the fact that you're able to travel and locum around now and catch up with your old friends and colleagues as well. And also...
I have been blessed.
and also just being able to explore a little bit about what your hopes are for the future as well. I think that's been really helpful today and hopefully insightful for a lot of the people that have listened to this episode as well.
Oh, great. Thanks for having me along.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Okay.
Take care.
See you later.